Let's see if this thing is worth its salt.
Channel, Rise of Edge Crusher. I'm an Overwatch coach with a focus on helping bronze and silver players learn the skills they'll need to rank out of bronze and silver, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Seita Scrim lobby code. This is a tool which is helpful to coaches at the highest level of play, such as contenders and Overwatch League, but teaches bad habits to the lower ranked players. Not just bronze and silver players either. In my opinion, using the preset does more harm than good for any team ranked masters and below.
Interesting.
First, I'm going to talk about what the Seita Scrim code is and what it does, then explain why I believe it teaches bad habits to organized Overwatch players ranked masters and below. After that, I'll explain what the intended purpose of the code was and why it's helpful.
This man talks like a first iteration of text-to-speech.
To teams at the highest
like,
levels.
I'm pretty sure this is actually what, like, he was actually the first actor that they wanted for Terminator, but he turned them down, and so they had to go with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Play. For any viewers who are new to the game and aren't familiar with organized play or scrims, I'll briefly explain what a scrim is. It's a custom game played between two pre-organized teams using the competitive rule set to practice their skill and coordination as a team.
Like,
in a scrim,
I automatically feel my IQ dropping as I listen to him, not because he's stupid, but because this is being delivered so professionally and so crisply that I feel stupid now. I feel every single time I open my voice, I just hear like, it's making me uncomfortable and self-conscious.
Each team wants to practice attacking and defending the full map. So if the first attacking team doesn't complete the entire map, the map will be reset to allow both teams to practice attack and defense for the entire map. Seita Scrim is an Overwatch workshop game mode used to preset a lobby to host a scrim. The most popular feature of this workshop mode is that it eliminates the need to reset the map by allowing the payload to move past the destination marker set by the first attacking team, if that destination marker is short of the final checkpoint. It also allows either team to add time to the beginning stage, in which the attackers wait and spawn while the defenders get set up, or both teams to mark themselves as ready during that same stage to open the attacker's spawn doors and begin the game within 5 seconds. It allows defenders, before the game has started, to melee while in their spawn and be teleported immediately to the first checkpoint to set up. It displays several player stats to any coaches and analysts who might be spectating the game, including damage dealt, damage taken, deaths, and healing dealt. Sounds incredibly convenient, right? Unfortunately, there are some ways in which it teaches bad habits to lower ranked players. The most notable is that
So before we start, this is something I've honestly not really thought about. I've thought a little bit about like because like Korean, I think it's Koreans that are famous for like not like they want to win the map. You know, you play to win and that's it. But it's interesting.
Granted extra time in which to choose their team compositions. Since the Seita Scrim preset became popular, I've seen many teams add extra setup time to the clock, using it to discuss their team comp or make changes to their team comp. This is a terrible habit to be getting into. If you're learning how to play the game together as a team, your strategic shot caller needs to know their teammates' hero pools, be able to put a comp together, call it, and have your team out the spawn door within the default allowed time. In a tournament, you won't have a fancy preset to take all the extra time you need to discuss your team comp and spawn.
Okay, so I actually disagree. So I think he's making a good point that you don't want to over-reliance off of having an eternity amount of time, but the point of Seita is that it allows you to not replicate a tournament setting, but to better increase the quality of your actual practice. In other words, you know that that's not something that you're going to be given during a tournament, but it's okay because it's at the expense, you're getting competitive integrity at the benefit of an increased quality turning time, because you're not rushing to pick a comp. You know what you're picking, you know what you're practicing, now go. So like, you never want to be the team that takes always, I love you, be safe please, that takes forever in scrim lobby, but you do want to take time to like discuss and this and that. And so like what he's saying is like, oh, you should never have time, you should just treat every single thing like a competitive, but like that's not how you learn. Like obviously there's some times where you should speed it up, and you should not always have, here's the deal. Once you know what compositions you should play, you should be a little faster. Okay, what's our goal? All right, let's go. What's our goal? Okay, what is our focus for this map? Okay, what do we need to do? But like, I don't like the way he's saying this at all. That's not how you learn. You're not always put under immense like competitive pressure.
If you can't choose your heroes and get set up within the default time allowed by a standard match, then you need to practice that. I've also seen plenty of players.
How do you practice? Like, okay, you need to practice that, but like also you also might need more time to discuss the composition. Like maybe you need more time to like. The thing is like, yes, you can practice getting faster, but even Overwatch League teams take some time with Seita because they want to discuss like strategy and comp and what they're going to do better. Because like the goal isn't always to be as fast as possible. The goal is to make the training as valuable as possible. Like what this guy is saying is like you should be rushing like when you're working out. Let's say that you're working out for the army. Okay, you want to work out for the army. If you're working out for the army, they're going to have a lot of situations that replicate the stress and pressure that you deal in a real life-threatening like battle situation. But there's also going to be training that's skill specific, like target practice, weightlifting, things like that. Imagine if you were not allowed to lift weights in the army without being in full gear, or without being in the middle of a sandy desert, or without being under heavy fire. Like that's ridiculous. There's a difference between training for building skills and building knowledge and building teamwork and training for competitive situations. Those are two different things. And what this guy is saying, if you have a problem with picking a comp and discussing fast, if you can't do it within 45 seconds, then you need to work at that. And I agree, but I also disagree that any time over 45 seconds is too long. Like, even if you're an extremely experienced team, have been working together, you already know what comp you're going to play, you've already played the map a million times, taking a couple minutes to reiterate what goals we're working on, slight adjustments you want to make from last map, that takes more than the time that they give you. I don't agree.
Who don't add any extra time to the clock, but they do take extra time to discuss and choose their team comp, knowing that the feature by which they melee to arrive at the first checkpoint will allow them to get set up in time. Though less extreme, this is still a bad habit to get into, for the same reason explained before. In a tournament, you will need to choose your heroes, get out of spawn.
And just because he's saying, like, I think his idea is that lower ranked players are less likely to know what composition they're going to play, and so are less likely going to be spending time talking a strategy and more time talking about the composition that they're playing. But just because lower ranked players are a little bit stupider, a little bit slower, doesn't mean that they don't get the additional time. You know what I'm saying? I understand that recently, but that's bad. That's a bad idea. Real-time training involves real-time. Like, that's like saying, all right, coach, you have any feedback? Nope, we already talked about in VOD review an hour ago. If you can't remember, then I can't tell you. That's not, are you daft? No, that's not how this works. So this guy's argument is that, like, well, let me just let it play.
Walk to the checkpoint and set up within the default time allowed by the game. You won't have the option of taking your time, then pressing melee to teleport to the first checkpoint. And here's the next problem. Seita Scrim removes the meter count.
Okay, anyway, that's my TLDR. Like, I understand what he's saying, but I think his solution by removing Seita entirely is a terrible solution to the problem. It's like, oh, my leg hurts, I chop it off. You don't get the option of doing it anymore. Well, how about we address the problem of being inefficient or slow? Like all you're gonna do if it's a bronze or plat or gold team that's terrible at deciding a composition is by speeding it up, they're gonna be just complete chaos with whatever comp. You're not gonna fix the problem.
Bar at the top of the HUD, which shows the payload's progress once the first round has been played. It also removes the indicators that mark the locations of the first and second checkpoints. In the short term, this gives a small strategic advantage to the team who defends in the first round, as they will have that information available, and the team defending second will not. In the long run, though, it will unconsciously train teams who use it to stop looking for that information, making them more susceptible to C9ing the point.
That's fair.
And then there's the stats that it so conveniently displays for the spectators. I often hear from my lower-ranked players that I work with that their coaches love the Seita Scrim code because it allows them to look at the player stats and identify exactly what's going wrong in a team fight. If these players were at Grandmaster level, I would absolutely agree. In lower ranks, especially Platinum and below, player stats are largely irrelevant to coaching.
Player stats are irrelevant almost regardless of the situation. I have never once in my life looked at Seita's stats. I don't know anybody coach who does. Analysts, I'm not going to speak for analysts, but stats in Overwatch are just useless. It's like having an NFL or a professional soccer, like looking at stats instead of looking at the tryout. You're looking at the player playing the game. You're looking at the team playing the game. Don't look at the stats, man. Stats are something that you can kind of get a general idea of a player's competency, but like you need a very large sample size and you need it not while the game is actually going on, where you should be watching. Numbers in Overwatch are just wash.
And a coach who relies on them is
There's a reason why statisticians and analysts are usually hired by networks and not hired by teams. And this is even in professional sports. Now, I'm not saying that there's no teams that don't hire analysts, but it's the minority. You hear me? Analysts and statisticians are usually hired by networks or organizations that have something to sell and not the actual teams. Because what stats do is they build a narrative and they're entertaining to look at and study. But they don't provide you valuable information. They're just fun to look at.
Not going to give the player any helpful information. Let's say a coach is working with a golden
And the reason I agree with him, but I would extend it all the way to out. Stats just don't matter.
main who'd like to get
Baseball and the NBA have useful stats these days? Right, no, I agree that they have useful stats. Yeah, but it takes a lot of more work. And my challenge is, how much value, how much work do, like, okay, here's another good point as well. Why do you think baseball stats are a lot more significant than other sports stats? First off, you said it took decades for those stats to mature, but why does baseball rely more on stats than other sports? What is unique about baseball? Several things. There's a couple things I can think of. Number one is the sport of baseball is more individualistic than other sports. There is less team play. A lot of the interactions are between pitcher, catcher. If the ball goes to you, you are required to make an executed throw. There's not a lot of, oh, well, my team didn't back me up there. If the ball's hit to you and you mess up a throw to first and you make an error, that's it. That's on you. That's not in your pitcher. Obviously there might be more forced errors. That's not in the other left fielder or the third baseman. It's on you. It's an individualistic sport where you have to function as a unit, but it's an individualistic. It's the same thing at bat. Like, did your second baseman sitting in the dugout, chewing his cud, spitting on the floor, distract you from hitting and striking out? No, that's on you. That's on you. It is a very much individual performance sport, if that makes sense. It's a very one at a time. And not only that, but baseball also plays almost 200 games. So there's a much lower chance of statistical discrepancy of one player looks really good for a month, one player looks really bad. They play so many games. But as soon as you start to go a game like soccer, American football, basketball, where there's a lot more interactions between players and you're relying on a system or you're relying on your teammates or you're relying on a play call, right? Baseball, basketball, football have those, or football, soccer, basketball have those, then the stats matter a lot less. Same thing goes with Overwatch. Overwatch has a lot more in common with basketball and football than it does with baseball. 162, yeah.
The coach notices on the Golden Decree's weapon accuracy that it's hovering around 30%, 35%. So the coach says, I'd like you to work on your aim and try to get that number up. It should be around 50%. Well, what happens then is the McCree is always going to be watching that number. He no longer goes for the shots that will be harder to hit because he knows he's going to miss those anyway.
Good point.
Instead, he takes safe, cautious positioning. He shoots at the large hitboxes, the easy targets, tanks, enemies that are just in his ideal range and already being pressured by another teammate anyway, so there's no pressure being put on him.
Overwatch is more like soccer. Yeah, that's fair. It's probably less like football because there's less set plays, restart, set plays, restart. It's more like basketball and soccer. Those sports are very similar.
His weapon accuracy jumps straight up, and he thinks he's improved this huge amount in a short time. But in reality, by doing that, by changing his playstyle in that way, he's never going to learn how to land those harder shots because he stopped trying for them. That's not going to help him get to plat. And I've worked with a lot of lower
So my problem with his logic here is I 100% agree with what he's saying. Absolutely agree with what he's saying. But that's nothing to do with Seita. Seita doesn't even, Seita has the option of stats, but you don't have to even use them. It's what Seita is causing people to do, which I guess you can argue is a flaw with Seita, but that's really rough. That's hey, you have the option to use this, but some people misuse it, so therefore it's a bad thing. I don't agree with that logic, but I understand what he's saying.
Players who had coaches like this, it would end up with the coach saying, I don't know what to tell you. You're improving. You should be climbing. And meanwhile, the player feels out of control. No matter what they do, no matter how much they're improving, they're just not reaching the next rank. And they feel like they can't reach this next rank and they don't know why. They don't know what's going wrong. I firmly believe that coaches who need statistics to evaluate a player don't have a good understanding of how to coach.
Nice.
Instead of focusing on numbers, a coach should focus on the player as an individual. What do they want to get out of the game? What do they enjoy doing? Do they like controlling the pace of the game, getting a lot of glorious kills, enabling their teammates? Do they like making fast-paced decisions, or would they rather move through the team fight at a slower pace? Once you've identified that, The coach should be identifying the player's weaknesses. Maybe they're out of position a lot, or they have a bad sense of how much space their team is controlling at any given time. The coach should then guide the player to correct those weaknesses in a way that builds towards doing that thing that they enjoy the most about the game. Coaches who focus exclusively on stats will not help lower-ranked players reach their goals, and will often take the fun of the game.
They won't help higher-ranked players either.
Away from them and turn it into a frustrating chore and a frustrating experience.
Excuse me.
For these reasons, I recommend that lower-ranked teams not use the Seita Scrim preset, and instead use a basic competitive rule set game with all 3 maps of a control point enabled and kill cams disabled. Resetting the map takes 5 seconds at most, and is a tiny inconvenience in comparison to the negative effects on your team's tournament performance from becoming too comfortable with the Seita Scrim preset. But I do think the Seita Scrim preset is good for teams at like Overwatch League or Contenders level of play, which is what it was intended for. And I am going to explain now why the Seita Scrim preset is helpful to that level of play. Coaching is very different at the highest levels of play. Every player in Contenders or in Overwatch League already understands how to aim, already understands how to position, and how a team fight is supposed to go.
Kind of.
Coaches at those ranks don't have to teach players to stand at corners or line up their crosshair at head height where an enemy will peek. Instead,
we have to talk about corners, trust me.
coaching is focused on helping players identify ways that they can each use their individual strengths to best enable each other in a team
That's
fight.
fair.
Part of this involves determining exact moments in which your team was put at a disadvantage and what little thing led up to it. For example, let's say that a team is staging a dive, and they're waiting for the enemy team to walk around the corner. This is a team at a very high level play. Everyone correctly positioned, coordinated, all converging on the enemy team at the same time. But before they can get that member of the enemy team isolated, their Winston is dead, and then they're forced to disengage. Here, the player stats displayed to the spectators by the Seita Scrim preset can actually help the coaches. By looking at the damage done and damage taken statistics, the coach identifies the exact moment at which the Winston player took a massive burst of damage during the dive. The coach can also identify which player...
No, you don't. You don't look at stats to find out why the Winston took him. You look at the field where the Winston actually took the damage. Hey, look, I see Winston. He's mispositioned. He's got to take a chunk of damage. Like, the stats don't tell you that. I don't understand.
Players on the enemy team put that damage into the Winston. Now the coach can tell the Winston and D.Va exactly what angle they need to be mindful of at what precise timing.
No, that doesn't give you that. But you, even if you knew where the damage was coming from reading the stats at the perfect right moment, you still don't know. You would need to know where the enemy was positioned to do that. And if you knew where the enemy was positioned, you wouldn't have to look at the stupid stats to know who was actually putting out the damage.
During the engage, what to watch out for, what went wrong, exactly, down to the second. At such a high level of play, those statistics become relevant because all major problems like positioning and coordinating and engage have already been solved.
No, they haven't.
Those players are also well aware of what team comp they're planning to run. They use the features of the Seita Scrim code to start the game sooner, not to give themselves extra time to prepare.
That's also false. We absolutely... Overwatch League and Contenders teams sometimes take more time than necessary. Like, they take even longer. Like, we just had a big discussion about how, like, a lot of Overwatch League teams shouldn't be rushing to get through, like, 6 maps in a scrim.
Efficiently select their team comp, set up, and are ready their team to begin the game in under 30 seconds, allowing the most possible time to practice.
No, but the thing is, it's not just about the most possible time to practice, it's about the quality of practice, not quantity.
That concludes this video.
Okay. I'm gonna give it a tolerable. Like, he says some good things in here, and I like a lot of his points, but I think his conclusion is incorrect, and I disagree with a lot of his other points. Now, I'm not gonna nitpick him for not knowing how Overwatch League and Contenders scrims work. I don't care about that. Like, not everybody has to have the insider knowledge of that. But it does annoy me that he said this, like, that he's got his stats confusion wrong. And I don't like his conclusion that, oh, an entire preset is bad because it has the potential to be misused. That just seems like an irresponsible way of doing it. So I don't know. Like, I get, like, he's probably like clickbaiting it to get that information across, which is, you know, I understand that, but I do not agree with the concept of the video, so I have the right to criticize.